truly captured. And that is, I think, what we are looking for to make sure happens in this part.
Yes, Colgate, Darian Fenton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And, as my colleague Andy Little has said, part two is the guts of the bill. I mean, we've debated a lot in part one about the setting up of WorkSafe, which is, of course, a very, very important part of the architecture of our health and safety system into the future. But part two deals with changes to the Health and Safety and Employment Act and also the employee participation or worker participation in the health and safety in the mining sector. There are some things I think that were improved during the process of considering the bill in the Select Committee, and I want to mention those before I get to the things that I feel disappointed about and I want the Minister perhaps to comment on. I think under Clause 27, as it was originally presented, Section 19U2, a person could not be elected as a mine health and safety representative unless they met the competency requirements prescribed in regulations. Sounds fair enough, but submitters told us that would provide a barrier. It would limit potential candidates for the role to those who'd already received the necessary training. So the Select Committee has recommended that we amend the provision so a person could be elected without the prescribed competencies but would not be allowed to exercise the functions and powers for which training is required until they completed their training. So that, I thought, was a very practical and sensible response to submitters' concerns about how we actually get this operation, this change happening in mines. I think another change that came about, I think, from submitters, there was some concern expressed by some submitters about the potential liability of health and safety representatives, and that the Select Committee listened to that and heard that and are recommending that health and safety representatives should have immunity from liability for any acts or omissions in good faith when exercising their functions or powers. So again, that was, I think, a positive change. However, I think the big change that's happened in Part 2, Mr Chair, that is most disappointing is the narrowing of the application of Part 2, the health and safety requirements in Part 2, from applying to all mining operations, including quarrying and some types of tunnelling. And we believe that that scope was appropriate, and we did have submissions, of course, from those with vested interests, owners of mines above ground. We also had submissions from workers or workers' representatives who represent people in quarrying operations and tunnelling operations, and they had a completely different view. So I thought that the bill as originally presented gave us an opportunity to do something quite advanced and quite, that would make a big change, just rather than focusing on the narrow issues arising out of Pike River mine and underground coal mines. And I think it's a real pity that the recommendation, obviously, from the Minister was the scope of the legislation would be narrowed, and I think what we will see, it's inevitable. At some stage in the future, there will be a process failure, there will be a problem arise in a tunnelling operation, a quarrying operation, and perhaps some type of tunnelling, and there will be a safety failure, and we will have to come back and look at this legislation again and say, why didn't we take the opportunity when we had it to make sure that we were covering off those people. Now, I see that what the submitters were saying to the government was that it would place an unreasonable regulatory burden on quarry operators. Well, I've heard that before, haven't you? About regulatory burdens. I mean, it wasn't a regulatory burden to have health and safety, in Pike River mine. Wasn't it? Wasn't that one of the failures, that actually profit came before health and safety? Was that one of the things that the lessons that we should have learned? And that they've gone on to acknowledge that they need better regulation of health and safety. urgently. Yet they don't want it in this bill, and they don't want it in the form that's in part 2 of the bill, which is mainly around industry health and safety representatives and site health and safety representatives. But however, Mr Chair, Mr Chair, but what the quarry industry is saying is that they, well, actually what the Ministry is saying, Moby is saying, is that they intend to work with the quarry industry to develop a set of quarry-specific guidelines with a longer-term view to developing quarry-specific regulations. Now, I hope we see that happen rather than the longer term. I hope we see that happen fairly quickly, and we're not in the situation at some stage of looking back and saying we had the opportunity while we were debating this bill, this bill as originally presented, you know, that we don't say, look, why didn't we just leave it as it was? Why did we change it? Why did the Minister give in to the interests of some big business who was submitting to the committee at the time, cave into their pleading that they should not be covered by this particular part of the bill? I wanted to comment too on Part 2B, worker participation in health and safety in the mining sector. It is a very, very important part of the bill, and I think, as other people have said, this is a kind of the crux of the problem that we've had with our system in health and safety for a long time. While technically under the Health and Safety and Employment Act there is worker participation, there are expectations that workplaces of a certain size have worker participation or employee participation systems, the reality is that they have become a means of provided an employer could show there was some sort of system and it was on paper and they ticked a few boxes that met the test of employee participation. Now, as we've heard from colleagues who have been arguing about the setup of the board and the importance of genuine worker voice, that applies just as much in employee participation. And I share Andrew Little's concerns about the language around this a little bit, that it is much more about rather than delivering the voice of workers to help protect their own health and safety, it's more about delivering the needs of business to protect health and safety, so we're still in this sort of tick-the-box regime. I think there is quite a lot of things there that could have been tightened up. I hope that when we see the health and safety legislation, when it's finally presented to Parliament, I think it's supposed to be later this year, we'll see some learnings from this legislation, from some of the contributions that have been made around this. But I do think we're missing an opportunity. I think it's one of the things we do, of course, support is the role of industry health and safety inspectors in underground coal mines, and we have been calling for that. The Engineers Union have been calling for that. We know, my colleague Damien O'Connor can attest to the fact that these were check inspectors, as they're called. We were being called for way back, that there was a review done into coal mining. There was a report recommending that it was ditched by the then Minister Kate Wilkinson, and that is a sorry part of the history of Pike River Mine. However, we are now in a situation where, of course, we're hoping that we've learned the lessons of Pike River Mine. I'm hoping that we can persuade the Minister to adopt Andrew Little's amendment to Part 2, which would put back in, that's on SOP 388, which would expand the role of check inspectors to ensure quarrying and tunnelling operations are included, so that all mining activities that carry high health and safety risks are covered. I think it's a very sensible amendment, and if the Minister will not consider it, I would like to hear from him directly about why, other than lobbying from big industries and big players outside the coal mining industry, why he decided to change this bill when, as presented, it included quarrying and tunnelling operations. So, Mr Speaker, I think, as I said, Part 2 is a very important part. There's a lot in it, and I hope we get plenty of opportunities to comment. I hope my colleagues do as well. It does consider things like training of site health and safety representatives, and another good thing I think that was included by the Select Committee was an explicit requirement or duty on the employer to provide time off for health and safety training, because that's also been a problem, a specific requirement on an employer to do that. And the worker participation system under this bill must have a provision that increases or decreases the numbers of days paid leave. Thank you.
The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And it's not often I get to up in the House here and